Good afternoon, and welcome to the second session of the series on SCN mothers. Today, we have the joy and honor to have Sister Frances Crumpleman, who has done a bit of research on both Sister Agnes Higdon and Sister Angela Spink. And as we said last time, it's not that they are less important, the fact that there are two, but as we planned it, it's an effort to get as many of the mothers as we can into this series by October. So we're happy to have Frances today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you're going to applaud also when it's finished. These two mothers are what I call part of the forgotten mothers, ones that we have kind of ignored, forgotten about, didn't know much about. And I have to admit that with the help of archives and Sister Maria Vincent, with several books, I have done a good bit of research. I don't pretend to have done everything we can find about these two mothers. So if in your spare time someday you say, I wish I had something to do, this would be an interesting project for you. And if several of you get together, that would be even more interesting. I just want to show you the resources that I've used. Sister Mary Ellen's book, of course, because Mother Catherine's time in office spanned both of these mothers, they're included to some extent. Many of you know this book. It was done by Sister Agnes Geraldine, and it has a listing of all our missions. The schools are listed first, and the hospitals, social service. She did this one up to a certain point, and then she did another one that brings us up to 1985. And she has little sketches of some of the things. We have numerous copies of this. Sister Anita Hager would be happy to give you one in the library. There's another version of it that's tan. This is invaluable. This one you may not know very well. It's done by Sister Columba Fox. She's the sister of Sister Mary Ignatius Fox. And this, I think, was probably her part of her master's degree. It's about Bishop David, but obviously his life was so entwined with our history that there's a lot about our history. And she gives you a little different view than we get in other things. Of course, Anna Blanche McGill's book, The History of Our Community, and then Ben Webb. Ben Webb wrote the first 100 years of Catholicity in Kentucky, and it's quite good. And there's a lot about the families. You know that the Catholic emigrations from Maryland began in 1785. I noted on a chart that he has, I don't know whether the camera can pick this up at all, but he has a chart. In 1785 in Kentucky, there were 125 Catholics. By 1829, there were 18,000 Catholics in Kentucky. It's an interesting chart. He worked with the United States Census to get this, and of course with the church statistics. He has how many priests were here, how many churches, chapels, how many religious communities. It's invaluable. And then he has lists of the families that came from Maryland. And you'll find some of your ancestors in it, I know. You'll find practically every Catholic name you ever heard of, and some you didn't. And some from down in western Kentucky. You know that once the Catholics came from Maryland, they came mostly to this area, and then they gradually went west and prospered every place that they went, probably because of sisters and because of education. More than anything. So with that little background, I'd like to start with Agnes Higdon. The Higdon family trace their ancestry in England way back in the 1700s. So they were a well-established family. They had a sense of history. They stayed together. They prospered, and they came to Kentucky. They came to Maryland. And in Maryland, they seem to have been business people and to have had a little more than elementary education. They had some advanced education that would have been available in those days. In the Bardstown courthouse, I looked at some of the record books, marriages, property transfers, and so on. The Higdon signatures are beautiful. They're just lovely writing of the period. And the family was a large family. They prospered. And Sister Mariula Johnson, where is she? Mariula Johnson is descended from that family, so she's on their tree, hanging on one of the branches out there. There is a family history that Sister Mariula clued me in on some years ago, but we've never been able to find it. One member of the family says, well, so-and-so has it, and somebody else says, so-and-so has it. And the last one, Sister of Loretto, died, and we still don't have it, so I don't know. Somebody said it's behind a picture somewhere, but anyway. When I mentioned Agnes Higdon's brother, Bennett Henson Higdon, Sister Eula said, oh, he's my uncle. He's in our family. Now, I think he's probably a great or double great uncle, but he's in the family somewhere. Charlotte is Mother Agnes Higdon. She had two sisters in the community, Josephine and Alexa. We think they were her sisters, but even the earliest records are not clear about it. They may have been half-sisters. One of them may have been a cousin. Josephine and Alexa are buried next to each other in the cemetery, and they are more or less at Agnes's feet. I've done a lot of research and can't clarify that. So ultimately, it doesn't matter. They all three came to the community, and they all three served.
Franny, what about Mary Flagg?
She probably is. What about what's her first name?
Mary Flagg.
She may. All these people are related, and people in Kentucky talk about my cousin Joe or my cousin Benjamin and so on. Well, it may be a third cousin, twice removed. And one reason that they kept track of the family and who was related to whom was to avoid intermarriage. I know when I was in Fancy Farm, their families grew there, and the families are limited. And the mothers passed down the need to their daughters. Now, you cannot date him because he is your third cousin. And, there was a church law, I guess it still stands, against marrying somebody too close kin. So it was important in Kentucky because these people who came over from Maryland came in family groups, and Ben Webb notes that. And he can tell you the progenitor of the family. It's just interesting if you look through it. Progenitor of the family, and then of course there were generations. And the confusing part is, like, if they have Thomas Spalding, you'll have Thomas Spalding in the next 8 generations. Or if they have Angela, they'll have her in. So it's hard to tell who is who. And that's why the families in Kentucky, they said, people laugh at us about Kentucky cousins. Somebody even came one day and was talking to me about her half-aunt. But it was important to do that so in order to avoid intermarriage, for one thing, and then for property settlements and settlements of wills and so on, that they know where do you belong in this family. So they were careful about doing that, amazingly careful about doing that.
Francis, Rosanna Higdon is from Fancy Farm.
Oh, that's right. There are Higdons. There are 2 different families, aren't there, in Fancy Farm, Higdons?
Not that I know of, but
You can find them, trace them from Kentucky through western Kentucky, all the way through the Catholics from Maryland, all the way through. So Charlotte her baptismal name was Charlotte. When she came to the community, they changed her name to Agnes. She was, we don't have any good records on her or her family. And there may be two reasons for that. Somebody told me that if you can't find records on people, there are probably two reasons. One is they were never in prison or jail. And the other is they probably didn't change, that the land they had didn't change hands. It got sent down to the generation. So we don't have a lot of records on the Higdon family. The Higdons left, they didn't leave in the first migrations from Maryland, which were 1785, 87, 88. They didn't leave in those. They didn't come till about 1800, probably because they were so well established and they weren't going to pick up and bring all that they had over to the wilderness. So she didn't get here. And they lived in Frederick, Maryland. They were not in, they were a little farther west than Leonardtown. And when they started, the large caravan of families that they started in, they had gotten about 40 miles from Frederick, and Charlotte's mother died very suddenly and unexpectedly. And it may have been, you know, the getting ready, getting the children ready, getting whatever furniture they were taking, and poor woman, I don't know what happened to her. We have no record, but she died. And so her husband took her back to Frederick for burial, and we never heard of him again. He never came to Kentucky. So Charlotte and her siblings, which we know there were at least 4, these other 2 sisters and Bennett Henson, came to Kentucky with relatives, the way they all came. Charlotte may have been the oldest girl. She could have been, different records, she could have been as old as 20 when she came to Kentucky, or maybe as young as 15, somewhere in there, but she was at least a teenager. And she would have helped to take care of her siblings after they came over here. So when she came to the community in 1815, she could have been as much as 30 years old when she came. She may have been even a little bit older than that. And her family, we're not sure whether they settled at Cartwright Creek, which is Springfield, or Cox's Creek, which is Fairfield. I don't know if all of you, if you're not from Kentucky or around here, if you know this. Like if Bardstown is here, then let's see, for you to go east is to your right. So if you go about 20 miles, you come to Springfield, and that's Cartwright Creek. And then if you go from Bardstown, if you go a little bit east, you get to Fairfield, and that's Cox's Creek. Now, we know Cox's Creek up the road, don't we, on 31E. But Cox's Creek goes, like some of the others, goes all through the area, and then it has branches. And one family who lived in Fairfield, I said, what's the name of that creek? And she said, East Fork. I said, East Fork of what? And she said, well, I don't know, we never asked, but it's the East Fork of Cox's Creek. And so they had different names for them on Cox's Creek. So when they say Cox's Creek, it's not up 31E, it's over in Fairfield. And they would have been, 15, 18, 20 miles apart. And so all the early settlements, Catholic settlements and churches were about that, about 20 miles apart, so that people could easily get there. On horseback, they could do that in, half an hour easily, 20 miles. So it would be they didn't have to go too far to church. But the Higdons, we don't have records, so we're not sure whether they were out in Springfield or in Fairfield, at any rate. And then another point, I read somewhere that all these girls who were, almost all of them, who were in the community in the early days belonged to sodalities. They had the sodality of the Rosary, they had the sodality of St. Vincent, the sodality of St. Joseph, of the pious ladies, of this or that. Now, today we still have the Queen's Daughters, that sort of thing. And they would have interacted in those sodalities, so they were not totally unknown to each other. Plus, Mother Agnes was related to Catherine Spaulding through the Pierce family. Now, the Pierce family might be P-I-E-R-C-E or P-E-A-R-C-E, but Mother Catherine's sister married a Pierce, And the Pierces were related to the Higdons. So Catherine and Agnes are not related to each other, but they're related to the same people. You have some relatives like that, I'm sure. So they would have known each other. Now, Agnes was probably pushing 30 when she came to the community. And she's related to Catherine Spaulding. And it's 1815. And Agnes evidently had led an exemplary life, probably belonged to some of these sodalities. The day she arrived, they gave her the habit. The very day she arrived, they gave her the habit. And a year later, so 1816, she made vows. And a couple of weeks after she made vows, they appointed her the procuratrix of the community. Now, the procuratrix does the buying and selling. Today we'd say it's the purchasing department. If they needed potatoes, she was responsible for it. And if the price of tomatoes was too high, then she was the one to see that we didn't buy tomatoes at this point. They needed whatever the business things were. So another proof that her family were good business people, and that she had some responsibility as the oldest sibling who came over here when her mother died and her father was back at home and never came to Kentucky. So a few weeks after she made vows in 1816, she was made procuratrix, responsible for the business of the community. And when Mother Catherine Spaulding finished her term in 1819, she was elected mother. So she had, from the day she walked in the door, 1815, until she was elected mother in 1819, obviously 4 years, right? So what does that say about her as a person, as a religious? What did the sisters think of her? Now, you know that in the beginning, Julie's going to do cards for us. In the beginning, when Catherine Spaulding was elected, we had 6 sisters. You may need to hold it up for the camera. So you know that. You know that by heart. 1813, we had 6 sisters. By 1819, we had 21. Is that right? We had 24. 1819, we had 24. So the community had more than doubled. And that includes some people who had withdrawn. This is how many stayed. And others had entered and withdrawn. So when Catherine finished her term, there were 24 sisters. And of those 24 sisters, they chose Agnes to succeed Catherine. Now, imagine what that said about Agnes. She'd only been with them 4 years, vowed for 3. They evidently thought she was a fairly good procuratrix and elected her mother. So now she's elected in 1819, right? And the community grew and people came, and probably this was already planned. 1819, Bishop Flagey and Father David moved into Bardstown. The cathedral was ready and the rectory was ready, and they moved into Bardstown. And shortly after they moved into Bardstown, David was made a bishop. And before they got here, before they got to Bardstown, Flagey asked Catherine Spaulding if they would open a school in Bardstown. So in 1819, Flagey moved into Bardstown, the cathedral was ready, the rectory was ready, and we started Bethlehem Academy. There on the corner, over where Dr. Stiles' office is today. We started Bethlehem Academy. And that probably had been planned by Catherine Spaulding. It actually opened a month after, or a month or 2, after Agnes was elected mother. But I don't think we can give her credit for that, really. If you want to, that's okay, then, whatever. After this, she's elected in 1819. 1820, the next year, Father Abel was out in western Kentucky. How many have been to St. Vincent, Kentucky? How many have seen it? You remember how long it took you to get there? It's not next door. And I believe it's 120 miles. And they asked for sisters, and so Mother Agnes got a band together and sent them out there. Why they went in November, I cannot figure out, but they did. And you know the story. They got caught in freezing rain, and they were on horseback, which was the fastest mode of travel. And they got caught in the freezing rain, and the three sisters who went, the oldest one was Angela Spink, and the youngest one was Frances Gardner. And Agnes, and we'll talk about Angela Spink in a minute, but she was older, she was bigger, and Frances Gardner evidently was, you know, about the size of what Teresa preferred to call it. She was just petite, short, petite, and she had frozen to the horse. And they had to, farmers opened their homes to travelers, and they had to lift her off the horse in seated position and take her into the fireplace and get her clothes thawed out before she could straighten up and get ready for the night. When they got to St. Vincent, things were not ready and so on. But anyway, Agnes Higdon, back to her, she's the one who okayed their going out there, got them ready and so on. And Columba Fox, in her book describing this, and describing Agnes Higdon, notes that she often conferred with Catherine Spaulding. And we would probably say, well, of course. She had only been in the community 4 years. She was somewhat unfamiliar with things, and Catherine, being the leader that she was, she would have. So I'm sure that she talked with Catherine, and they all talked, you know, to each other about who would go and what they would do. And when they heard the story, that they would have been compassionate and wondering about the sisters and so on. So she did that in 1820, and the school out at St. Thomas, meanwhile, is prospering, and more girls are coming to the community. And then they had, in 1822, the news that they couldn't stay out at St. Thomas, they couldn't own the land, and they would have to move. So it was Agnes Higdon who, with the help of whom? I don't know. I wonder if the Gardners were well settled up at Fairfield. Who knew about this land? I doubt that the sisters did, but somebody helped them, maybe the bishops, maybe other friendly families, and they found that this farm on which we are now seated, that this farm was for sale. A Presbyterian minister owned it, and he was moving. He moved down to Bowling Green and established the first Presbyterian church, which Rita Davis says is still flourishing. So he ended up quite happily down there. And whatever negotiations they went through, they bought this farm, 237 acres, and they moved in the springtime. They began to move. A few sisters came and planted some crops with a servant. And then they actually moved, I put it on my calendar, I think we should celebrate. They moved on June the 12th. So if you want to put that on your calendar, it is the day the sisters moved from St. Thomas right here to Nazareth. I think we should celebrate, do you? Yes. Celebrate December 1, but I think this is, see if we can give it a little pomp and circumstances. So now, how long has Angela been in the community? She came in 1815, she's been in 7 years now. Right, 1822, and she had to oversee and prepare with the other sisters. I mean, they worked collegially and cooperatively. They all came here and got things settled. And you know the story that the minister's house was where the Annunciation Grotto is. That's why we put that grotto where it is. That was the minister's house, or study, I think they called it. And it was the best house on the property. And we have an early drawing of the others there. Almost lean-tos, but it was summertime, so they could make do with that. And they made the minister's parlor or study, they made that their chapel. And students lived there, and of course a couple of sisters would have lived with them to supervise. And so our first chapel was where the Annunciation Grotto is. I think you know that. And Bishop David said to the sister, oh, yeah, we have a picture of the chapel, I forgot. Bishop David said to them, is this a good, Bishop David said to them, build first a house for God, and you can finish that, you know the end, and then God will build a house for you. So this is the house they built for God. And on the back of it, I don't know, we can pass this around. It's a little, we did not have photography at this point. So this is a sketch that somebody made of it. The chapel, and behind it was a small brick addition where sisters lived. It's basically where the kitchen is today. And if you go out in St. Joseph's Court and look at the kitchen, you can see that the architecture is very different from anything around it. I went one day to see if we could find the foundation of this. There's a basement down there, but it doesn't look like a foundation of something this old. But this is the chapel that Agnes Higdon had built, and it's brick. So they made the bricks, and probably the bricks were quicker than felling trees and hewing the logs and moving the logs and so on. They could move the bricks more easily. And they used this, until 1854 when we built the current church. You know that. So when Agnes got here, she first built a house for God and then built one, then God will build one for you. I don't know if you want to pass this around and look at it more carefully. And we'll have it after we finish.
You can leave them all up here.
She also began to build a school. There were about 38 in all who came, sisters and students, 30 and some servants came, about 38 in all. And they just lived in whatever was here at first. And then almost immediately when they got the chapel finished came in 22, by 24 it was well finished. They probably began to use it a little bit before. If we have time, I'll tell you a little bit more about that chapel. Columba Fox has some interesting things about it. They began to build a school, and with the other sisters, Agnes said, well, we'll think about building for 100 students. And when the bishops found that out, they were horrified. What are you thinking of? But they got busy and got the bricks made, and they built a school exactly where the colonial porch is now, and the mother house. That's where they built it. And it was a school. The sisters lived in part of it the way those of you who are in school here are in, if you were a novice around, you know that a sister lived in the dormitory with the girls. The sisters slept there and watched over them. Girls were supervised 24/7 with the sister. And so the sisters had to have room in the school. When I was talking with Sister Catherine Leo about that school, one time called it the Mother House, and she said, Francis, I have told you, it was not the Mother House. The sisters lived wherever. It was a school. Excuse me. So what Agnes built was a school. Now, eventually it became the Mother House, but in the beginning and for many years, it was the school. And it must have been in a kind of form of a U, and the bricks were quickly made and put up. But by the time they were ready to begin, in September, now they took the school to between 24 and 26 to make the bricks and get it built and get the interior finished and so on. It was 100 girls approximately had registered. And many of them were from plantations in the south of the country. They were very wealthy and they paid their tuition in advance. So good news. And I'm sure the sisters didn't go to the bishops and say, whatever they might have said. But God blessed them and they got money to get started on, and they had a good footing to begin. So Agnes would have overseen that. And meanwhile, Agnes is overseeing the community. She's overseeing the school. She built the church. She built this school. She didn't do it. She oversaw it. And the community is increasing. By 1824, we have 51 sisters. Anna Blanche writes that when we moved here, the community flourished. So when we came here in 1819, we had 24 sisters. By 24, we had 51. Luke made these signs for us just after dinner today. So we had definitely 2 doors. So the school had about 100 girls in it. The community had 51 sisters, and they were here, and we were trying to build accommodations for them.
Excuse me, this is a detail, and maybe anybody knows, but when you put up a building, don't you have to have someone with knowledge of mathematics and architecture?
Yeah.
And who was responsible for?
Well, they hired builders. There were, in the early community, the pioneer community, there were, like today, you could hire a builder and an architect. You know, the sisters didn't go out and make bricks and pile them up and look good, a house came out of it. And they were propped up with logs and so on. I mean, they wouldn't have lasted as long as they did. But that's a good question. Yeah, there were tradesmen around, and obviously because all of a sudden, like her mother, Agnes died. It's like this. So, what was going on? I tend to think we need to maybe just look at that in longer, short time. Did they have aneurysms in the family? Did they have heart attacks? Did they have strokes? You know what? But the fact that she died about the same age as her mother would have been, and died, you know, with no warning, and under a lot of pressure. If we have time, I'll read you what Columba Fox says. It's very precious that she said, with all that Agnes was doing, and at her age now, she's up in her 30s, she dropped in. And after they buried her, they were looking at continuing and discovered that the financial books were not as complete as they might have been, and some of the people who had done work for us, some of the architects or builders or furniture makers, they found that if they claimed that a bill had not been paid, that we would pay it again because we didn't have a record. And they spread the word. So several enterprising neighbors, shall we say, sent their bill twice. So there was great commotion in the community. Something that I read said the debt was about $4,000. And Flagey was furious, David was furious, and they called Agnes all kinds of names and how careless she was. And I mean, the reputation they gave her was terrible. Columba is much more gentle. She said there were a few accounts that they could not trace properly. And that she had, now, with all, why did that happen? Well, can you imagine the situation Agnes and the sisters were in? These girls are flocking in, girls are coming to the community, they're trying to get things built. Meanwhile, they have to raise the food, they have to cook the food, take care of the sick. People are, and it says when they came here, they didn't stop their ministry to their neighbors, whatever that might have been, seeing that they had food if they were sick or so on. And she had, Frances Gardner was one of the treasurers, and right at the end, Eulalia Flagey was. Now, Mary Ellen says that that might have been part of the problem. Eulalia didn't understand English, and she was the treasurer. But whatever the treasurer did or didn't do, all the blame fell on Agnes's head. And to sisters, I don't know about you, but if I'd say to you, do you remember Agnes Higdon? Do you know anything about Mother Agnes Higdon? Almost the only thing, myself included, I could have said to you was, oh yeah, she's the one who didn't keep good books. And is that, anybody else have that idea of her? I'm alone in that, okay.
You're not alone.
Oh, not alone. Mary, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I've heard that because I worked with a book that's written by a Frenchman about fishing.
Oh, yeah.
Jack.
Mary translated the letters.
That's what they said. And the story there was that she had been out cutting, I guess she wasn't cutting hay, but she was working with the hay, and she was, tired. And that's when she dropped in. I don't know if that's true, that's what I read.
Would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, can you repeat it?
All right.
Tony's going to
We'll
provide
use
a
the
microphone.
microphone.
Repeat it. Repeat it, Mary.
I didn't hear it either.
Oh, here she comes.
At one time, Sister Rachel and I worked with a book by a French priest about Bishop Flagey. And in that book, that was the story that I remember, that according to him, she had been working with cutting hay, and she dropped in. I think maybe in the field, I don't know about that for sure. And also the story was definitely that she didn't keep good books, that she counted on her memory to remember things.
Thank you, Mary. And perhaps she had a photographic memory. All right, and it wouldn't have been, thousands of debtors. There weren't that many laborers around or companies around. So, in all of this, I realized that, like, if you read these 4 or 5 books that I have, and Sister Maria Vincent, I forgot to mention that, she did a paper on Angela. You're getting my opinion. You're getting my interpretation of what I read. If anybody in this room read the same things and put it together, you'd have a little different view. You might get a totally different picture. So this is what I have read. This is what, with the help of others, that I have gleaned. What do you think of Agnes? Just think about it sometimes. What do you think she looked like? We have no picture of her. She died before photography, lived and died. And what do you think about her? What kind of a picture? One of my missions, a little private mission in life, is to rehab her reputation and to give her credit for what she did. That she is the one who was responsible, other sisters were there. She was responsible for getting us here, for sending sisters to St. Vincent, for building the first church, for buying the property, for the first building over here, the growing community, the growing school, and it killed her. Okay, let me put her to rest. Julie's reminding me that we're on a time limit.
Francis, what year did she die?
1824 she died. And to whom did the community look for a replacement and a leader? Catherine Spaulding. And called Catherine Spaulding from Lexington, and she came back and filled Agnes's term, and then had her own 6 years. So that term for Catherine was actually 7 years. And so when she finished those 7 years, now we're up to 1831, right? And in 1831, we have 71 sisters.
Francis, could I just quickly go back 1 second to your question? Thank you.
Your question, which was excellent, was what do we think that Agnes was, remember when you asked that question a few minutes ago about Agnes Higdon? I think it could be useful to look at the history of the ordinary woman of the times, and in what I've read about pioneer women in this state and nearby states, they were real powerhouses. They were able to do multiple tasks because they had to. So I won't delay with any more about that, but I think that's an avenue that would probably be informative. Thank you.
Okay. All right, now we're up to 1831, and we have 71 sisters in the community. Catherine has finished 4 terms, 3 years each, elected, re-elected in the beginning, and then after Agnes's death, called back, and she did 6 more years, and 7 years, and Mary Ellen has covered those amply. We're here at Nazareth, things are growing, and the sisters saw a need for a legal entity. And to that point, any legal transactions had to go through the diocese or through the bishops. And they said, we need our own incorporation, we need our own ability to give diplomas to the girls, to buy and sell property, to make business transactions. And so we need a legal title. So they got established Nazareth Literary and Benevolent Institution in the December of 1829. And you know that we and the Sisters of Loretto applied at the same time, and ours was, even though they were founded a little before we got our corporation before they did, so our corporate title, so it's like now we're even. Anyway, so as soon as they got the letters of incorporation in December of 1829, they had to think, now who will be on the board? And the person they put on the board was, one of the few people they put on was Angela Spink. And Angela Spink is the one who was elected mother after Catherine finished in 1831. So a little preview on Angela. Now, who was Angela Spink? You'll love her, I think. Angela belonged to her mother was a Howard, and Dolores Greenwell has Howards in her background. Dolores is, I think, a little typical. You know, we looked at Pascal and say Frances Gardner might have looked like that. The Howards were noted as large people. They were tall, they were well built, they were sturdy, they could work hard, they were formidable, some of the men. I don't know if you knew Father Howard, who was out here in Bardstown. He was around here for a while. I mean, they're big people. Some of them, you know, approached 7 feet. The women were tall for the age, you know, for that time. They were tall. Dolores among us is one of the, when she was younger, she was one of the tallest that we had in the community. Now, Angela Spink belongs to that family. So they were large, sturdy, hardworking, serious people. And they belonged, as the Higdons were more business people, the Spinks were more farmers and tradesmen, and they did the heavy work because they could, because of their body structure. And we have almost nothing on the Spinks. They settled at Cartwright's Creek when they came. They settled in Washington County, what's now Washington County, around Springfield. And I went to the courthouse and looked through some of the records that are there. We know that Angela Spink, Sarah was her baptismal name, that she did not have a formal education. She picked up a lot of things in her family, practical things, business. She was sharp, but she just was not well educated. And her brother's signatures are with an X. I did not find any of her brothers who could write his name, X, and then they have his name beside it. Now, Angela evidently could do more than that, but it kind of gives you an idea. Remember I told you that the Higdon signatures were beautiful. They had an artistic, they had a more developed formal education. So there was formal education and there was informal education. And some people did so well with an informal one, they didn't feel the need of a formal one. It was like, oh, don't bother with that stuff, you know. So that's the Spink family. So we go back and forth. What kind of families did these mothers come from? So Angela came from that one. And Angela was the youngest in her family. Remember, Agnes Higdon had been the oldest. She's the youngest in her family. And again, she was somewhat older when she came to the community. And when she came to the community, she was, she was born in 1785. We have her birth record. She came to the community in 1819. So Mother Catherine, who was the novice mistress, would have been her novice mistress. And Maria Vincent does a nice job in her paper here, if you want to look at that Angela Spink was formed in the community by Catherine Spaulding. And remember that Agnes Higdon, the year after she was made mother, elected mother, she sent sisters to St. Vincent, and Angela had just made vows, and she sent her to St. Vincent as the superior. So again, what does that say of her? What kind of a person was she? You know? When she got to, when the sisters, you know, I told you that they went in freezing rain, and when they got to St. Vincent, the house they were supposed to live in had not been vacated by the family. So what to do? They looked around, and there was a log cabin that they had used as a chicken house. So I don't know if you can imagine, if you've been around chickens, what the place must have looked like, but they did whatever cleaning and got there for the night, and the next day they found a bench somewhere and they scrubbed it up, and that was their table. You can imagine how primitive it was. How many of you were missioned at St. Vincent? Two. I was there for 1 year. I followed Mary in the 1960s. It was still primitive. Now, in the meantime, it had had a glorious day, but it's out really. You could stand in the yard and hear not one mechanical sound, only the insects and the breeze in the trees and so on. It's so far out. But that's where they were, and sleeping in a chicken coop for a couple of nights until they found something a little bit better that they could find for their housing, and then eventually their family moved out. So Angela now is this sturdy, well-built, practical woman. You know, if it's got to be done, do it yourself. And so she was out felling trees. She planted the garden. She plowed, dug up the roots of the trees and the weeds that had grown there, and got enough food for the sisters in the springtime. They say she got up at 4 in the morning, and required only 4 or 5 hours of sleep. That she was very, sturdy, that she could do that, and she wrote poetry. So, what kind of a woman was she? Well, you can imagine her that she didn't have a lot of time to spend on centering prayer or walking in the woods, contemplating God in nature. While she was cutting trees down, while she's digging up the roots, while she's plowing the ground, I think Angela must have been praying. She was like Ignatius. She found God in everything. Could you imagine her with a tree saying, "Oh God, help me, I've got to do this. And, well, I'm too tired to do this, but yeah, give me help. I have to do it so that we'll have food." There are those young sisters there and the students there. I can imagine that Angela found God in everything. She was a contemplative in action. And when she had time in a few minutes, she summed it up in poetry. Up before the sun, maybe working after sundown, through the night. You picture this sturdy woman, truly a noble pioneer woman, doing that, living that way, providing for others, being concerned. She's the superior of the group, and it's her responsibility, and got whatever help she could that was available in the area, but she was the one responsible. Thank you very much. Now, you remember that she went down there in 1820 to St. Vincent. We got the charter, NLBI charter in 29. They had their first meeting in May of 1830. She was on the board, the first board of NLBI. So it says what the community thought of her. So 1831, we have 71 sisters. We have a brand new charter of incorporation, and they want to find people for the board, those who would be the best business people, the most astute to make decisions for the whole community. Of course, they put Catherine Spalding on. The bishop had to be the head, David, and put Catherine Spalding. The next person they chose was Angela Spink in 1830. And so she made the trip again on horseback back from St. Vincent, back to Nazareth for the first NLBI meeting. And as far as I know, she stayed on for years. They depended on her business ability. So it was time again to elect a Mother General, 1831. So Catherine had gone in when Agnes died in 24, and so by 31 we're having another election, right? And they elected Angela Spink. Of the 71 sisters that they had. Now, they've elected Catherine 4 times, and then they elected Agnes Higdon, and now they're going to take Angela Spink. They had 70 other choices. Well, they had 69 other choices, novices excluded, and they chose Angela. What does that say about Angela? And what the community thought of her? And evidently, Agnes Higdon was a little bit stiff, and she could be brusque. But Angela, this great big woman, was very motherly and gentle, and people loved her. So she's elected mother. And at that point, the mother was also head of the academy here. And this academy was renowned in the whole South. And because of Ellen O'Connell, they taught mathematics, trigonometry, geometry, astronomy. In languages, they taught Greek. The girls could make a speech in Latin. Ruth Marie talks about that, but that was early on. They had globes to work with, geographic globes they had to work with. They taught music, they taught art. It was a classical education in teaching Shakespeare and Milton and declaiming and what do you call it? Making speeches and so on. And Angela said, I don't know a thing about any of that. You know, can you imagine her coming in what her hands look like from felling trees and plowing and so on? And they said, we want you to teach Milton or Shakespeare. And she said, or, you know, oversee it and oversee the teachers. She said, look, I don't have that kind of education. I can't do that. But Ellen has done so well, we'll get Ellen to do it. And by that, you know, Ellen was Bishop David's postulant, as we say. And Ellen must have been a real imp. And so at some point, she would imitate people and make fun and make jokes and so on. And one day, evidently, she went 1 inch over the line, and she mimicked David. And this is my opinion again. You could ask anybody else in them and get another opinion. I think what she did was probably so true, so accurate, that it made him furious. So he got so angry with her, he wanted to send her out of the community. She couldn't make vows. He was going to send her home, as it were, for that. So that's going on, and Angela was elected, and she said, I can't do the academy. I'll do all the other things, but, you know, I've got it. She's big on delegation, and so she said, I get Ellen to do that. And at this point, David didn't want Ellen to have that kind of influence. So she's now on his blacklist. And he said, no, indeed. And some sisters sided with David, and some sisters sided with Angela. And Ellen was willing to do it. She's kind of a bystander in this. And so Angela said, I can't. And David said, oh, you will. And whatever else happened, we can read different accounts of what happened. And finally, Angela put her foot down and she said, if you force me to be head of the academy, I will simply not renew my vows and leave the community. Now that's how inadequate I feel. Well, thank God she knew herself and knew her limitations and stood her ground. It would have been ridiculous for her to say, I'm the head mistress of the academy, and if somebody asked her, you know, why she simply didn't know. So the sisters said, please don't do that. We do not want you to do that. And meanwhile, David is in the mix, and Ellen O'Connell is in the mix. Now, how did it play itself out, you know, in a day-to-day basis? Read it and make your own opinion, is the best I can say. So finally, it came down to, we're now in 1832, and the powwow is still going on. And the sisters renewed their vows March 25th. And Angela is still saying, if you force me to be head of the academy, I will not renew my vows. It came down to March the 24th, afternoon. And the sisters said, fine, okay, they agreed, and David agreed, you don't have to be head of the academy. Oh, no, you do have to be head of the academy, but you can stay in the community. So she did renew her vows, but then she resigned as mother, or she resigned as mother and then renewed her vows. But David did not relent, and she did not relent, and Ellen was left sort of hanging out there with her, no telling whom she had imitated by this time. And so David said, well, I'm going to send you both to Indiana, to White River. And White River was in the middle of nowhere. And so now we need another Mother Superior, right? And that's Frances Gardner. And you have to wait another month to hear about Frances Gardner. So Angela was sent to White River, and Ellen was sent to White River, and it didn't even last a year. It was just an impossible situation. And Angela then was sent back to St. Vincent, and superior was a friend of David, and you can imagine what that was like for Angela. But Angela continued to the end of her life, 1854, at St. Vincent, and she's buried down there. And I went down there in 1965, and they were just redoing these tombstones. And on her tombstone was Sister Angela Spink. So Mary Catherine Clarkson was a superior, and she changed it to Mother Angela Spink. And her name is on the crucifixion scene on that big stone that's underneath of it. When Anna Blanche McGill wrote the history we have of our first 100 years of big, the history of the Sisters of Charity, in the back of it, she lists the Mother's Superior, Angela Spink. I can hardly wait to meet Angela in heaven. And Agnes also. I think they were both remarkable women and did a real service to our community. Can you imagine standing up to David and saying, wait a minute, I don't have the education to take care of that academy, and so truly, let's get somebody who can, and we'll get on with the work of God, the work of the community. And it became a tradition, what can I do and what can I not do? Look at ourselves and be honest. And again, Agnes Higdon, there's some nice stories about Agnes Higdon, her strictness and her sense of humor also. And I think these sisters, not only these two, but other ones of our early sisters, it bears looking into their lives and what people are saying about them. And then today, what I've said about them. In a sense, I've done the best I could. But take it with a grain of salt. You might find something that's really better. You may find something different. You may find something in addition, a great aha. But at least you have the skeleton. And I would invite you to think about these women and maybe pray to them and see, what was their life like? What was going on inside them? Their own prayer life, their own surrender to God. What the meaning of their vows for them? Their relationship to the community, their devotion to the church, their devotion to the works of charity, devotion to St. Vincent de Paul. Okay, I think our hour is up.
Right now.
And just 1 second. We have to stop, I think, because of the video at 1 hour, and then after we turn the camera off, we'll still have discussion. Is that correct? We can keep the camera running? Okay. You're on, Mary, but...
What happened to Mary?
Mary using mine.
What happened to Ellen O'Connell?
She stayed on in the community, and O'Connell Hall is named for her, and she became an illustrious teacher and head of the academy. Is Mary Vincent want to add anything to that?
When they came back from Indiana, Angela went to St. Vincent's and Ellen went to St. Catherine's. She went to St. Catherine's in Lexington, and she remained there and taught. Superb teacher she was. And Ellen died suddenly. You may know this story, that she was, she could mimic and make fun and cause a lot of joy at recreation. So one night she said at one of their recreations when they were enjoying, she said, we're having so much fun, but she said, who knows, tomorrow night I may be called. And she died the next day. She died suddenly. December 18th, 1841. And the reason I remember that is 36 years later, her student, Columba Carroll, for whom this room is named, died December 18th, 1878. So Ellen is going to weave herself into many stories. Frances, thank you for such an excellent
It's not only a privilege, it's fun, isn't it? Just to look into these people and have them come to life again. And know that there are 4 mothers and we're here because of them.
Francis, thank you. And thank you, Maria. Many people know that I'm a kind of one-woman press agent for Ellen O'Connell because we could never have opened that academy 2 months after she entered if she hadn't come to join us on June 14th, 1814, and we opened Nazareth Academy on August 23rd of 1814 because she was a trained teacher. She had her own school in Baltimore. How she ever came, she was a little older than most of them, how she ever came here to live in that cabin at Old St. Thomas is, I think, almost miraculous. And there's a quote that I can't identify, but I read it when I was doing research about wherever, and I can't give it verbatim, but it's like this: wherever the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth teach children, older people, whatever we do in the way of education goes back to Ellen O'Connell, who started, and then her, Columba Carroll was her student, of course, the first one to get that diploma from Henry Clay, and it went down in a chain of wonderful women to whom we're all indebted, as are our students.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Francis,
Yes, Margaret?
wait a minute, let me get the mic. What events happened in history that caused, what events happened in history?
Start again. What happened in history
That
that
caused the exodus into Kentucky, the ones from Maryland?
why did the Catholics leave Baltimore,
What-
Maryland?
I mean, I know there was some event that happened in Maryland that caused